Jack lived alone on his ranch far away from the crowded towns. His ranch stretched wide with broken fences, dry fields, and a small wooden house that carried the smell of smoke and dust. He had once been a soldier, but that part of his life was long gone. Now his only company were the horses in the stable and the old dog that slept by the porch. The days passed slowly, one after another, always the same. Jack woke up at sunrise, fed the animals, fixed whatever was broken, and sat in silence when night came. He was a man who carried heavy memories. Memories he never spoke about. People in town sometimes saw him when he went to buy supplies. They whispered that he wanted no friends, no neighbors, and no family. Jack did not care what they thought. Silence was safer than people. The ranch itself seemed as tired as the man who owned it. The wooden barn leaned to one side, the gates squeaked every time the wind blew, and the fields had more weeds than grass. Yet Jack never left it. It was the only place where he felt in control, where no one asked questions and no one looked into his eyes searching for the soldier he once was. He liked it that way. To him, peace meant distance. It meant being far from voices, far from war, far from anyone who might remind him of what he had lost. At night, he often sat by the fire inside his cabin, staring into the flames as if they could burn away the past. He had medals locked away in a box under his bed, but he had not opened that box in years. He knew what was inside. Reminders of battles, reminders of blood. Sometimes in the deep dark of night, he woke up sweating, hearing the echoes of gunfire in his dreams. He told himself those days were over. He told himself he wanted nothing to do with anyone. And yet sometimes when he saw the empty chair across from him, he felt a deep ache that silence could not heal. The dog, old and half-blind, was the only one who heard his voice regularly. Jack spoke to him about the weather, about the fields, sometimes even about the past. The horses, too, gave him comfort, their calm eyes watching him as he brushed their coats or poured water into their troughs. But no animal could answer back, and Jack had taught himself not to expect answers. Life had become a long road of days that looked the same, stretching forward without change. The people in town knew Jack's story only in pieces. Some said he had left the army after losing his unit. Others believed he had walked away because he could no longer bear the killing. No one really knew, because Jack never confirmed anything. He carried his truth locked inside, and his silence built a wall higher than the fences around his ranch. Anyone who tried to speak with him quickly learned he did not welcome company. He was polite but distant, nodding his head, speaking short words, and then walking away. Over time, people stopped trying. The ranch was quiet most nights, the only sounds the cries of distant coyotes or the creak of wood when the wind grew strong. Jack liked it that way. He thought nothing would ever disturb this peace, not after all the years he had built it. He believed his life was set, quiet days, silent nights, and nothing more. But deep inside, under the layers of solitude, was a heart that had not forgotten the warmth of company. He had buried that part of himself, but it still beat quietly, waiting for something he did not expect. One evening, as the sun dropped low and the sky turned red, Jack walked across the fields checking the fences. His boots crunched on the dry earth, and the smell of rain hung faintly in the air. He paused for a moment and looked toward the distant hills. The horizon stretched empty and endless, and he thought, like always, that nothing would ever come from that direction. For years, the hills had given him only storms and shadows. He expected nothing more. But the world was about to change. The ranch, which had stood as a place of silence, was about to be shaken. Jack did not know it, but that very night his door would be knocked on for the first time in many years. His fire would no longer burn for only himself. The empty chair would not stay empty. His loneliness was about to be tested in a way he never imagined. He thought he had chosen a life of quiet, but fate had other plans. Soon, strangers from another world would step across his fence and ask for something he never believed he could give again: shelter, trust, and perhaps even hope. Would he let them in? Would he risk opening the door not just of his ranch, but of his guarded heart? Jack did not know yet. For now, all he had was silence. But silence never lasts forever. The rain poured hard, soaking the ground outside the ranch as Jack stood frozen at his door. 11 alien women stood in front of him, their faces pale, their clothes torn, and their eyes begging. Some of them were shaking from cold. One was carrying a small child wrapped in a wet cloth, and another leaned weakly on the shoulder of her companion. They looked like they had been walking for days without rest. Lightning flashed in the sky, and for a brief moment, Jack saw the fear written clearly on their faces. "Please," one of them whispered, her voice almost breaking. "We need shelter. Just for tonight." Jack's hand stayed tight on the door. His soldier instinct screamed at him to close it. These women were not human. They belonged to a species he once fought. Memories of the battlefield rushed into his mind. The fire, the screams, the sight of his friends falling. For years, he had convinced himself to stay away from anything that could pull him back into that world. And yet, as he looked at their trembling figures, his heart hesitated. They did not look like warriors or enemies. They looked broken, desperate, and hopeless. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Jack stepped aside. "Get in," he said. The women moved quickly, almost stumbling over one another as they entered the warm cabin. The firelight flickered on their wet skin, and steam rose as the heat touched their soaked clothes. The little child started to cry softly, and the woman carrying her pressed the child closer, whispering words Jack could not understand. Jack shut the door behind them, and for a moment the sound of the storm was replaced by silence inside. He leaned his rifle back against the wall, but did not let his guard down. He studied them carefully, noticing their differences. Some had faint marks glowing softly on their foreheads, others had hair that shimmered strangely in the light. They were alien in every way, but at that moment, they were simply people in need. One of the women, taller than the others and clearly their leader, stepped forward. She bowed her head slightly. "We are widows," she said in broken English. "Our homes destroyed. We have no shelter, no food. Humans, they do not accept us. They say we are cursed." Her voice shook as she spoke, but she forced herself to look Jack in the eyes. "You are our last hope." Jack frowned. "Why me? Why here?" The woman lowered her gaze. "We heard of a man who lives alone, a man who does not judge. We had no other place to go." Jack almost laughed bitterly. If only they knew, he judged more than anyone. He carried more hate than they could imagine. But as he looked at them, he realized they truly had nowhere else. Their thin frames, their tired eyes, and their wounded feet told him they had been wandering for days, maybe weeks. Rejected by others, they had found their way to him by chance or fate. He shook his head slowly. "You can stay," he said at last, "but only for a few days. After that, you move on." Relief spread across their faces, though fear still lingered in their eyes. They nodded quickly, as if afraid he might change his mind. The women gathered near the fire, rubbing their cold hands together, whispering quietly among themselves. The child stopped crying as warmth surrounded her, and she closed her eyes in her mother's arms. Jack turned away, busying himself with a pot of stew left from his dinner. He poured what little food he had into bowls and placed them on the table. "Eat," he said simply. The widows hesitated at first, looking at one another as if unsure whether they were allowed. Then hunger overcame doubt, and they began eating quickly, almost desperately. Jack watched them in silence, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He had lived alone for so long that the sound of others eating at his table felt unreal. Part of him wanted to send them away, to protect his solitude, but another part of him felt something he had not felt in years: purpose. After they finished, the leader spoke again. "Thank you," she said softly. "You saved us tonight." Jack stared at the fire. "Don't thank me. You'll be gone soon." But even as he said the words, he knew it would not be that simple. These women were not like travelers passing by. They carried wounds deeper than what his eyes could see. He could sense their grief, their broken spirits. He wondered about their husbands, about the battles that had taken them away. He wondered how much pain they had endured to end up at his door. The storm outside grew louder, wind howling against the walls, but inside the cabin there was a fragile calm. The widows curled near the fire, the child resting peacefully at last. Jack sat in his chair, staring at them, his thoughts heavy. He had let them in for one night, but he already felt the weight of their presence pressing against his quiet life. For years, Jack had chosen silence over people. But now, in the middle of the storm, 11 strangers sat under his roof, and something inside him whispered that his life would never be the same again. The next morning, the ranch felt different. Jack woke up early, as always, but when he stepped out of his room, the silence he was used to was gone. The widows were already awake, moving around the cabin with unsure steps. One of them was trying to light the fire again. Another was staring at the strange human cooking tools on the shelves, and two others were whispering while pointing at the window. Jack stood quietly for a moment, watching them. He was not used to this sight. His ranch had been empty for years, and now it was full of life, even if that life was awkward and out of place. The smell of smoke soon filled the air, and Jack quickly realized they had no idea what they were doing. One of the women had put too much wood into the stove, and now flames were licking dangerously high. Jack cursed under his breath, rushed forward, and pulled the extra logs out before the fire spread. The women stepped back, startled, their glowing eyes wide with fear that he might yell at them. But Jack only muttered, "You'll burn the whole place down if you do that," and calmed the fire with practiced hands. Later, he went outside to check on the animals. To his surprise, some of the widows had followed him, curious. One of them, tall and with silver hair, reached her hand toward a horse. The animal snorted nervously, pulling back, not used to the alien smell. The woman frowned, clearly hurt by the reaction. Jack sighed, walked over, and showed her how to approach slowly, how to let the horse sniff her first. She copied him, awkward at first, but finally the horse allowed her to touch its mane. The small smile that spread across her face was the first sign of joy Jack had seen since they arrived. But things did not go smoothly for long. Another widow tried carrying water from the well, but the heavy bucket slipped from her hands and splashed all over the ground. Two more argued over how to fix a fence, each pulling the wooden post in opposite directions until it snapped in half. Jack rubbed his temples, frustrated. He had worked alone for years, doing things in his own quiet rhythm, and now everything felt slower and clumsier with so many hands trying to help. Yet, he also noticed something he could not ignore. They were trying. They wanted to be useful, to prove they were not just a burden. As the day went on, Jack found himself teaching them simple tasks. He showed one how to gather eggs from the chickens without startling them, another how to use a hammer without smashing her fingers, and a group how to sweep the barn clean. Their mistakes were many, but their determination was clear. Whenever one failed, another would step in to try again. Slowly, they began to learn. Jack, who thought he had no patience left in his soul, discovered he was spending hours explaining things he had never bothered to explain to anyone before. By evening, the cabin was filled with laughter for the first time. The women were clumsy, yes, but sometimes their mistakes were so ridiculous that even Jack allowed himself a small smile. One widow had mistaken the soap for food and nearly bit into it before the others stopped her, laughing so hard that tears filled their eyes. Another had tried milking the cow, but had been kicked and landed flat on the ground, covered in hay. Instead of crying, she laughed too, rubbing her bruised arm. But as the sun set, the mood shifted. Jack stepped outside, needing air, and gazed at the distant hills. The sky was painted orange and purple, but his attention was not on the beauty. He had noticed something strange, shadows moving on the ridges far away. At first he thought it might be wild animals, but the movement was too steady, too controlled. He narrowed his eyes. Someone was watching the ranch. Jack returned inside, his mind uneasy. The widows were still gathered near the fire, tired from the day, whispering softly among themselves. He studied their faces. They looked more relaxed now, safer, but he knew safety was fragile. If someone truly was out there, watching, then these women had brought danger to his doorstep. That night, when everyone else was asleep, Jack sat by the window with his rifle across his lap. The wind whistled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of howls. He kept his eyes on the hills, where the shadows had been. Nothing moved now, but he did not trust it. His instincts told him trouble was coming. He glanced at the sleeping women, their faces peaceful in the firelight. They had stumbled, failed, and made a mess of his ranch that day, but they had also brought something back into his life. Voices, warmth, and even laughter. He did not want to admit it, but the thought of them leaving already felt strange. Yet if someone was hunting them, if their past had followed them here, then his quiet ranch was no longer just his own. As the night deepened, Jack's grip on his rifle tightened. He whispered to himself, This place used to be safe. He knew that was no longer true. Something was out there, watching, waiting, and soon he would find out what. The next few days passed slowly, but the ranch was no longer the same. Jack woke up every morning expecting silence, but instead he heard voices, movement, and sometimes even laughter. The widows were learning, little by little, how to live in his world. Yet under the surface, Jack felt something uneasy. He could see it in their eyes. Behind their smiles and soft words, there was fear. They were hiding something. He just did not know what. One afternoon, while repairing the barn roof, Jack heard a sudden cry from inside the cabin. He climbed down quickly and rushed in. One of the widows, a small, fragile-looking woman with dark blue eyes, had collapsed on the floor. Her skin was pale, and her body trembled as if she was fighting an invisible battle. The others gathered around her, whispering words in their alien tongue, their faces filled with worry. Jack knelt beside her and pulled back the sleeve of her torn dress. What he saw made him freeze. Long scars, deep and jagged, stretched across her arm and shoulder. They were not old wounds of work or accident. These were marks of torture, of weapons he remembered from the war. Jack recognized them immediately. His heart sank as he realized the truth. These women had not just lost their homes. They had been hurt, hunted, maybe even enslaved. The leader of the widows noticed the look in Jack's eyes. She slowly spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "We carry wounds," she said. "Not all of them can be seen. Soldiers, humans, and others. They left us broken." Jack clenched his fists. For years he had run from the memories of battle, but here they were again, lying right in front of him. He thought he could escape the war by hiding in silence, but these women carried the war inside their bodies. He made a decision without thinking. He lifted the weak woman into his arms and laid her on his bed. He fetched water, cleaned the wounds, and used old bandages from a box he had not touched in years. His hands worked automatically, the same way they had when he patched up fellow soldiers on bloody battlefields. The widows watched him closely, surprised by his skill, but they said nothing. When he was done, the leader sat beside him. Her eyes glowed faintly in the firelight as she spoke. "We lost our husbands in the war. They fought against your people. When the battles ended, we were left with nothing. No homes, no families, no future. To humans, we are enemies. To our own kind, we are burdens. We are widows of shame." Jack's chest tightened. The words cut deep. He remembered how soldiers used to talk about the enemy, never as people, only as targets. Yet here were their wives, broken, starving, trying to survive. He thought of the men he had lost, how their wives must have suffered too. Suddenly, the line between enemy and ally felt thinner than ever. The woman he had treated whispered weakly, "If we leave, we die." Jack stood, pacing the room, torn between anger and pity. His life had been built on avoiding these very choices. He wanted peace, not responsibility. But now, 11 fragile lives depended on him. He turned toward the door, staring into the dark fields outside. He remembered the shadows he had seen on the hills. Whoever had hurt these women might still be looking for them. And if they found the ranch, Jack would be dragged into a fight he never wanted again. That night, as the widows slept, Jack sat by the window with his rifle. He could not push away the thoughts in his mind. He looked at the women sleeping on the floor, huddled together like a broken family, and he asked himself why fate had brought them to him. Maybe it was punishment, maybe it was a second chance. Either way, he knew the truth now. They were not just refugees, they were hunted prey. The days that followed made it even clearer. Some of the widows revealed more scars, hidden under their clothes. One carried burns across her back. Another had a limp that came from a shattered leg never treated properly. Each story was heavy, and each one filled Jack with more anger. He was no longer only their host. He was becoming their protector, though he had never agreed to it. And then came the moment that sealed it. While he was repairing the fence one morning, one of the younger widows approached him timidly. She looked at him with wide eyes and whispered, "If men come, will you give us away?" Jack froze. He did not answer at once. The words tore at him, because the honest truth was, he had not decided yet. Protecting them meant war could return to his doorstep. Giving them away meant sending them to certain death. For a long moment, he stared at her, then finally said, "No one takes you from here without going through me." The widow's eyes filled with tears, and she bowed her head. It was the first time she seemed to believe they had a chance. That night, Jack lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His ranch, his silence, his peace. It was all changing. These widows had carried their pain into his world, and now he could not walk away from it. He told himself it was only temporary, that they would move on soon. But in his heart, he knew better. Trouble was coming, and when it came, he would have to stand between these broken women and the darkness chasing them. For the first time in years, Jack felt the soldier inside him awaken, and that terrified him more than anything. The peace of the ranch did not last. It ended on a cold morning when the sound of engines echoed across the quiet land. Jack was outside, fixing the gate, when he saw a cloud of dust rising on the dirt road. His stomach tightened at once. Visitors never came to his ranch, not unless they wanted trouble. He set down his tools and reached for the rifle leaning on the fence. The widows, busy feeding the animals nearby, froze when they noticed the same dust cloud. Fear spread across their faces. They knew what was coming before Jack did. Moments later, 3 trucks rolled up, stopping just beyond the gate. Armed men stepped out, rough-looking, with scars on their faces and greed in their eyes. They carried rifles casually, as if they had used them many times before. Their leader, a tall man with a thick beard, walked forward. His gaze moved past Jack and landed on the widows. A cruel smile spread across his lips. "So it's true?" the man said loudly. "The old soldiers keeping aliens here, widows of the enemy, spies, maybe." His words dripped with mockery. He spat on the ground, his men laughing behind him. "Hand them over, Jack. They don't belong here. They belong in cages." The widows huddled together behind Jack, their bodies trembling. One of them clutched the child tightly, whispering to keep her calm. Jack's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't raise it yet. His voice came out steady, cold. "They're under my roof. You're not taking them." The bearded man chuckled, shaking his head. "You've gone soft, old soldier. Years alone out here, and now you're keeping company with the enemy's women? Shameful. You know what they are. You know what they've done. Or maybe you've forgotten who you are." Jack's jaw clenched. He had spent years running from the war, trying to bury it, but now it stood in front of him, wearing human faces filled with hate. The men behind the leader spread out, surrounding the gate. Their weapons glinted in the pale sun. Jack could feel the widow's fear pressing into his back, but he stood tall, his eyes fixed on the leader. "They stay," Jack said firmly. "Turn around and leave." The laughter stopped. The air grew heavy with silence. The men shifted, fingers brushing their triggers. The bearded leader's smile turned into a sneer. "You think you can stop us, old man? There's one of you and 11 mouths to feed. You won't last a minute." Jack slowly raised his rifle and aimed it directly at the leader. His hands were steady, his eyes hard. "Try me." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was thick, like the seconds before a storm breaks. The widows held their breath, their eyes wide. Jack could hear the wind rustling through the dry grass, the creak of the fence behind him. And then the leader raised his hand. His men tensed, ready to fight. Before the standoff could explode, one of the widows stepped forward. Her voice shook but carried strength. "We are not spies. We are not soldiers. We are widows. We have nothing. If you kill us, you kill women who already lost everything." The men laughed cruelly. "Widows or not, you're still the enemy," one of them shouted. "You don't belong here, and neither does the man who shelters you." Jack's finger brushed the trigger. Now he had promised himself he would never point a gun at another human again, but now he was ready. His instincts, buried deep for years, came alive once more. He felt the old fire rising in his chest, the soldier inside him he had tried so hard to kill. The leader narrowed his eyes, studying Jack. For a second, he seemed to reconsider, but then his pride burned hotter. He spat again. "Fine. If you want to die protecting them, so be it." He motioned to his men, and in an instant, the first shot rang out. Jack dove to the side, firing back with precision. His bullet struck the ground near the leader's feet, sending dirt flying. The widows screamed, rushing toward the barn for cover. The child cried loudly, her wails piercing through the chaos. Bullets tore through the wooden fences, splinters flying. Jack moved quickly, using the old posts as cover, returning fire with calm, practiced aim. Every movement reminded him of the man he once was. The soldier who had survived battlefields far worse than this. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. One of the widows, instead of hiding, grabbed a farming tool and swung it at a man who got too close. He stumbled back, surprised, giving Jack the chance to fire another warning shot. Another widow pulled the crying child into the barn, shielding her with her body. Their fear was real, but their will to survive was stronger. The fight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. Dust, smoke, and fear filled the air. Finally, Jack managed to push them back, his rifle aimed at their trucks. His voice roared across the ranch, louder than the gunfire. "Leave now, or the next bullet goes through you." The leader, breathing heavily, glared at Jack. For the first time, his confidence cracked. He saw something in Jack's eyes. Something cold, unshakable, something that reminded him this man had survived wars he could not imagine. With a curse, he raised his hand and signaled his men. Reluctantly, they pulled back, retreating toward their trucks. The engines roared to life, and the dust cloud rose again as they sped away, leaving behind silence and broken fences. Jack lowered his rifle slowly. His chest rose and fell, his body tense, but his aim had not faltered once. He turned and saw the widows staring at him, not with fear, but with awe. They had seen him fight for them, risk himself for them. For the first time since they arrived, they believed he truly meant to protect them. Jack walked back into the cabin, his boots heavy, his heart pounding with old memories. He set the rifle against the wall and sat in his chair, silent. The widows gathered around him, their voices soft with gratitude, but Jack did not answer. His eyes stared into the fire. He had defended them, yes, but in doing so, he had opened a door he thought was forever closed. The war had found him again, and this time it had brought 11 lives that depended on him. The ranch was scarred after the fight. Broken fences lay scattered, bullet holes marked the wooden posts, and the smell of gunpowder still lingered in the air. The widows moved quietly, their eyes full of fear, but also something new: trust. They had seen Jack stand against armed men for them. They had seen him risk his life without hesitation. That night, as the wind howled outside, they sat close together by the fire. Their voices were low, but their glances often drifted to Jack, who sat apart in his chair, cleaning his rifle with steady hands. Jack did not speak much. His mind was full of heavy thoughts. He had defended them, yes, but he knew it was not over. Men like those would not give up so easily. They would return, stronger, angrier, and better prepared. He had lived long enough to know the taste of danger, and now it was clear the ranch was no longer a place of peace. It was a battlefield, waiting for its next attack. The widows seemed to understand this too. The very next morning, without waiting for instructions, they began to work. They picked up broken wood, carried stones, and tried to fix what had been destroyed. Jack watched them from a distance. At first, their movements were clumsy, like when they had first arrived. A hammer slipped from one hand, a fence post fell over twice before standing straight, and a bucket of nails spilled across the ground. But this time, their faces were determined. They were no longer just guests waiting for help. They were survivors preparing to defend their new home. Slowly, Jack found himself drawn into their efforts. He showed them how to dig proper holes for the posts, how to strengthen the barn doors, and how to tie knots strong enough to hold. They listened carefully, copying his every move, and soon they began to learn faster. By the second day, 2 widows managed to build a section of fence on their own. By the third, another figured out how to reinforce the roof of the barn with old metal sheets. Jack caught himself nodding with pride, though he said nothing. Even the youngest among them, a widow barely more than a girl, insisted on helping. She carried water, fed the animals, and even practiced holding a wooden staff as if it were a weapon. Jack almost told her to stop. But when he saw the fire in her eyes, he let her continue. These women had been through suffering he could barely imagine. Yet here they were, refusing to give up. At night, they sat together sharing food. Jack, who had eaten alone for years, found himself surrounded by soft voices and quiet laughter. The widows told small stories of their past, not the painful ones, but simple memories of home, of children playing, of gardens they once cared for. Jack listened silently, his rough hands resting on the table. He had never thought such voices would fill his ranch, but now they did. And the emptiness he once carried felt lighter. Still, the fear of attack never left. Every sound at night made Jack reach for his rifle. Sometimes he walked the fields under the moonlight, scanning the hills for movement. More than once, he thought he saw shadows shifting in the distance. He never told the widows, not wanting to frighten them, but he knew danger was close. One evening, as the sun dipped low, one of the widows approached him. She was the tall one with silver hair who had first dared to touch his horse. She looked into his eyes and said softly, "We are ready to fight if we must. We will not run again." Jack studied her for a long moment. He saw no fear in her face, only resolve. Finally, he gave a short nod. "Then we prepare," he said. From that day, life on the ranch changed. Jack trained them, not as soldiers, but as defenders. He showed them how to use simple tools as weapons, pitchforks, staffs, even slings made from rope. He taught them how to move quietly, how to spot danger from far away, and how to set traps around the ranch. At first, they stumbled and laughed at their mistakes, but with each passing day, they grew sharper. One widow, who had once been too weak to even lift a bucket, learned how to swing an axe with surprising strength. Another, with scars across her arms, became skilled at setting snares near the fences. Even the one who had collapsed from sickness now helped by preparing herbs and bandages, ready for wounds that might come. Jack found himself surprised again and again. These women were not helpless. They had been broken, yes, but inside them was a strength that matched his own. They had only needed a place to show it. As the days passed, Jack felt something stir in his chest, something he had buried for years. It was not just duty or survival. It was belonging. He was no longer a man living in silence. He was part of something larger, something worth protecting. One night, as they sat around the fire, the leader spoke softly. "You saved us, Jack. But now we will stand with you. This ranch is not just yours anymore. It is ours too." For the first time in years, Jack felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fire. He looked at their faces, tired but strong, scarred but unbroken, and he realized he was no longer alone. But deep inside, he knew this peace was fragile. The men who had attacked them before would return. They would come with greater numbers, with sharper weapons, and with anger burning in their hearts. The ranch would be tested again. Jack looked at the fire, his jaw set. He had once promised himself never to fight again. But now, for the first time, he was ready to break that promise. If danger came, he would stand with these widows, not as a man running from the past, but as a man finally finding a reason to fight again. The sun rose slowly over the ranch, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. The land looked peaceful again, but the scars of battle were still there. The fences bore marks of bullets, the barn walls had cracks from stray shots, and the ground was littered with broken wood. The widows worked quietly, repairing what they could, their hands steady and their faces calm. Life had not returned to what it was before, but something new had taken its place. The ranch was no longer only Jack's, it had become a home for all of them. Jack stood on the porch, watching them. For years he had lived with silence as his only companion, and now he was surrounded by voices, movement, and life. It felt strange, but not unwelcome. He saw the widows feeding the animals, carrying water, laughing softly with each other. The child, no longer weak and sickly, ran across the yard chasing chickens, her small giggles filling the air. Jack found himself smiling, something he had not done in a long time. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warmly. At night, instead of sitting alone with his memories, Jack now shared meals with 11 women who looked at him not with fear, but with gratitude. They had begun to trust him completely, and he had begun to trust them in return. Their bond was no longer one of necessity. It had grown into something stronger. They were a family, even if broken and unusual. But Jack knew peace could not last forever. His instincts told him the men who had attacked before would not forget. They would come back. Maybe with more weapons, maybe with allies. And yet, when he looked at the widows, he felt no fear. They had changed. They were no longer only survivors depending on him. They had become his partners in survival. Together, they had turned the ranch into a place worth defending. One evening, as the sky darkened and the stars began to shine, the leader of the widows sat with Jack on the porch. She spoke softly, her voice carrying a mixture of pain and hope. "We never thought we would live again, Jack. We thought we would only run, hide, and wait for death. But you gave us more than shelter. You gave us a reason to stand." Jack did not reply at first. He stared out at the wide fields, listening to the crickets singing in the grass. Finally, he said, "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. The strength was always there. You just needed a place to show it." The woman smiled faintly, her silver hair glowing under the moonlight. "Still, we owe you everything." Jack shook his head. "You owe me nothing. We stand together now. That's enough." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the silence between them was not heavy but comforting. The following days brought more unity. The widows worked harder than ever, planting seeds in the field, gathering wood, and even fixing old tools Jack had given up on long ago. The ranch began to change. Where once there was emptiness, now there was growth. Where once there was silence, now there was laughter and footsteps. Even Jack, who had once wanted nothing but solitude, found himself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose. He was not just keeping himself alive anymore. He was protecting something greater. But the shadows on the hills did not disappear. Jack often caught glimpses of movement in the distance, as if eyes were still watching the ranch. He kept this to himself, though he never lowered his guard. At night, he still kept his rifle near, sitting by the window long after the others had fallen asleep. The widows, however, no longer trembled with fear as they once had. They slept with trust, knowing Jack was there, knowing they were no longer alone. One night, as they gathered around the fire, the youngest widow asked, "Jack, will you send us away one day?" The room went silent. All eyes turned to him, waiting. Jack stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "This is your home now, if you want it. No one takes you from here, not while I'm breathing." Tears welled in a few eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief. For the first time, they believed they truly belonged somewhere. The ranch became more than shelter. It became a symbol of survival, of defiance against a world that had tried to break them. The widows began to carry themselves with pride again. They were no longer wandering shadows. They were part of a place, part of a family. But the story did not end there. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon. He was not from the band of raiders, but carried a message sealed with a strange mark. Jack took the letter, his face hardening as he read. The widows gathered around, anxious. The message was simple, but chilling. The men he had driven off were only the beginning. A larger force was coming. They wanted the widows back, and they would not stop until they had them. Jack folded the letter slowly, his jaw tight. He looked at the widows, who waited silently, fear returning to their faces. But instead of despair, Jack felt something else rise inside him. Determination. He stood tall, the fire of his old soldier days burning in his eyes. "They think we're weak," he said firmly. "They think we'll break. But they're wrong. This ranch is ours. We'll fight for it together." The widows, once broken and hunted, lifted their heads. Their fear was still there, but so was courage. They believed him because he had already proven he would stand for them. And now, they would stand for him too. The night closed around the ranch, but inside the cabin, there was no silence, no loneliness. There was only resolve. Jack had once lived as a man hiding from his past, but now he was something else. He was not alone anymore. He was the protector of 11 widows and a child, the heart of a family forged in fire and struggle. And though the storm ahead promised danger, one truth burned clear in Jack's mind. Whatever came, they would face it together.